Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of our entitled people. In today's episode, EP gets rape victim expelled from school. You want his for one half my price? I'll do it, but Karen called the police because I'm going out at weird times and slaps me. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. EP gets rape victim expelled from school. Longtime Reddit reader, first time posting. Background: I went to a very small, religious high school, graduating class less than 20 people. It was so small it didn't even actually have a campus. It used double wides with pop-up walls as classrooms. The education was actually pretty good. The classes were small enough the teachers could give people individual attention. And parents paid a premium to make sure their children were getting a proper, religious-based education. Science classes didn't teach evolution. Church on Wednesdays. Bible class was a mandatory ECT. The majority of the church/school were wonderful people, so it was a great community, most of the time. Also, I'm not here to start a debate about whether abortion is good/bad. I believe the decision is entirely up to the person, as you never know the situation that led them to choosing. Please keep an open mind. The reasons will become apparent later. To the story. My freshman year of high school, I made friends with a fellow artistic type who shared most of my classes. I'm gonna call her Candy. Candy and I got along swimmingly. She shared a lot of my beliefs. We could talk to each other openly. We also liked a lot of the same movies/books/artwork. So needless to say, if I had a class with her, we were practically glued together. One day, around March, I noticed Candy wasn't in school. First, she was gone a few days. Then it turned into weeks and then months. The school year ended, and I had no idea what had happened to her. This was a time before cell phones were very popular, and I didn't know her home number to keep in contact. None of the teachers knew anything. A few just told me, oh, her mother took her out of school, with no further explanation. Next year, my sophomore year, in the middle of November classes, she returned. She just appeared at school early morning and started going back to classes. I didn't have any classes together with her this year, and it took a while before I caught her between classes to catch up. I noticed right away that she seemed completely different. Her bright, bubbly spirit was gone. She looked sick and very pale. She wasn't wearing makeup, and she no longer took the time to do her hair in braids anymore. I asked her where she had been. What had happened to her last year? Why did she drop out of school? Why didn't you start this year in September with the rest of us? Are you sick? She didn't really seem up to talking. She just mumbled an excuse. My family was going through some stuff, and my mom thought it was best to take me out of school. For the next several weeks, we only ever talked during lunch. And I use the term talked loosely. She wouldn't talk about her absence. If I asked her if she had seen the latest popular movie, she would say, I don't really watch movies anymore, or I'm not really that interested. Candy had become a completely different person. I decided to give her some space. One day, after winter break, I was staying late after school to finish an art project. The art room was used as a kind of after-school study hall. I heard the door open. I turned around and there was Candy. She had been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy. She said between sobs, do you mind if I hang out in here while I wait for my mom to come pick me up? I immediately abandoned my work and went over to console her. She broke down almost immediately. After about 15 minutes of crying and hugs, she finally opened up to me. It turns out, the reason she had been gone is because she had gotten pregnant. Even worse, the father of her baby was her own father. Apparently, she had been the victim of sexual abuse from her biological father for several years. When she realized he had gotten her pregnant, she finally spoke up to her mother. Her mother had immediately taken her out of school and moved to another state to stay with family. They called the police. Her dad got arrested and pled guilty right away. He knew he had no argument. The DNA of the baby proved her story. Shortly after her dad's arrest, she had gone to a clinic and had an abortion. This was something that our church's religion strictly forbid. But she told me I couldn't stand the idea of possibly giving birth to an inbred baby and having him suffer. She had gone through hell and back. I was beyond shocked. I continued comforting her as best I could. After a long talk, she seemed better. She apologized for giving me the cold shoulder when she came back. Apparently, one of the conditions of her returning to our school was she couldn't talk about the abortion. The church who ran the school wouldn't condone her choice to abort rather than adopt out her baby. She may not have been talking about it, but someone working for the school/church sure had. Apparently, someone had told one of the mothers of a fellow student, and he had been accusing Candy of murdering her baby during class today. They had brought her to tears, and she went to the principal's office to calm down. The guidance counselor had basically told her, "You should cry. You murdered an innocent life. God is going to punish you." She had decided to wait for her mother in the study hall to get away from the office staff and their accusations. Her mother picked her up shortly after our talk concluded. She hugged her daughter and tried to reassure her. She put her daughter in the car, then walked back toward the office to give those teachers a price of my mind. I wish I could have been there to hear her tear them a new one. I must have been an epic yelling match, because the next day, Candy wasn't in school. She never came back, and I never heard from her again. That Wednesday, during chapel, the principal made an announcement. Some of you may have heard rumors that a fellow student at the school has been engaging in some unchristian behavior and had made some poor life decisions, including the sin of abortion. Everyone knew who he was talking about. Small school, and the rumor mill was powerful. He explained the church had agreed to let her return to school to help her regain her life and education. They said God would forgive her sin if she confessed and felt contrition for her decision, but she had refused to say she had done any wrong. Apparently, several parents of students had been complaining that the girl's lack of guilt over her abortion was a bad influence on the other students. They were worried she would encourage other young ladies to make ungodly choices. As a result, the principal had asked Candy to leave the school. They expelled a teen girl from school because she had aborted her inbred rape baby. And they had tried to guilt her by calling her a murderer and saying she'd corrupt the other girls. Several students were in an uproar over the way the school had treated Candy. I spoke to my parents that night, hoping they would back me up. Even they said Candy had made the wrong choice and deserved the punishment that came with her bad choices. Several friends said their parents had been less than supportive too. I couldn't fathom the contempt they showed Candy following one of the worst possible things that could happen to a young girl. She was betrayed by her father, her community, and her faith. I never heard from Candy again. Candy, I hope, wherever you are, that you are well and know you're loved. Everyone in your Christian school should be ashamed of themselves for blaming a rape victim. I'm just disgusted right now. Especially the ones with WWJD bracelets who seem to cherry-pick the passages in the Old Testament that reinforce their hatefulness with no regard for the Christian messages for love, hope, tolerance, and charity in the New Testament. The education was actually pretty good. Science classes didn't teach evolution. That's not a good education. The majority of the church/school were wonderful people. They expelled a teen girl from school because she had aborted her inbred rape baby. That's not what wonderful people do. Opie seems decent enough to be able to see right from wrong in this scenario, but is definitely still somewhat blinded by their faith. You want us for 1/2 my price? I'll do it, but I used to run a side photography business. I had a couple commercial clients, which are great as far as a photographer is concerned, because they're cash cows. Once you make them happy, they'll keep coming back to you. Anyway, this one dude would always be whining to me about price. He kept trying to give me a price a lot lower. One day he called me up, wanted me to do a job. I quoted it for something like $3,000. It was going to take a lot of work and take me a lot of post-production time. He called me back a few days and said some other photographer would do it for $800. At that point, I was like, okay, go for it. There is no way I could do that for that price. So I told him, have fun. Take care. Talk to you again later. He goes, but his work isn't as good as yours. That pissed me off. He knew my work was better, but he didn't want to pay for it. I replied that there wasn't much I could do. My price was my price, and if you really felt that I was too high, go ahead, have the other guy do it. The issue was the other guy was an absolute hack. He couldn't get anything in focus, nor could he get it lighted right. Basically, he couldn't do anything right. His work looked like crap, and well, that's why his price was only $800 and mine was $3,000. Anyway, he says, well, could you do it for that price? And I told him no, I couldn't. Anyway, he kept calling me every couple days, asked me if I could lower my price. Finally, one day I said, yeah, I could do it for $800. The guy was ecstatic. He said, when can you do it? I told them I could start right away, but just so you know, it would look like the $800 guy's work. He goes, what? I said that's what $800 work looks like. If you wanted to look like my good stuff, then it's $3,000. He slammed the phone down, swearing at me as he hung up. 2 days later, he called me back. He paid me the $3,000 and never quibbled about price again. At least the guy eventually realized he wasn't gonna win. He even thought he was so smart, thinking you would hear he had another offer and that would change everything. Nice job. I want a top-of-the-line gaming rig, but I want the Chromebook price. LOL, like, dude, that's not how that works. Anytime a small business owner is begging for lower prices, they're just saying, my income is more important than yours. Had a client who was begging for cut rate work. Think about a quarter of the going rate. I stupidly did the work, and the owner bragged how they'd blown $25K in Vegas, and they'd recently lost $150K on a scam. This was 15 years ago. They could have hired me full-time for 2 years with that money they'd wasted. I was literally subsidizing their gambling. Karen called the police because I'm going out at weird times and slaps me. The title sounds strange, but I really don't know how else to describe it. I was a 16-year-old from Serbia and I live in the building next to my grandmother's, but our entrances don't face each other, so if I manage, I'll draw a map. Now our buildings are divided into several buildings. Strange, but each entrance functions like its own building, as if we only share walls. You can't exit one entrance to get to another without leaving the building. Now I live in the entrance facing another building. If I go around it, the other entrance leads to my grandmother's apartment. Unfortunately, my grandfather passed away 8 years ago, leaving my grandmother alone in her apartment. My parents, back then behind my back, saw one empty room and asked my grandmother if we could turn it into my private room because I needed privacy. My grandmother was thrilled with the idea. After discussing it with me, we made the room for me. Since I followed my grandmother's rules and helped her, I didn't spend all my time at her place. Instead, I switched between apartments as needed. For example, I'd come home from school, leave my things, and go to my grandmother's to sleep, then return home in the morning to have breakfast. I had a sort of routine for when I went where, with an accuracy of plus or minus an hour. Karen called the police because I was going out at weird times. The title sounds strange, but I really don't know how else to describe it. I'm 16 years old and I live in the building next to my grandmother's, but our entrances don't face each other, so if I manage, I'll draw a map. Now I live in the entrance facing another building. If I go around it, the other entrance leads to my grandmother's apartment. Unfortunately, my grandfather passed away 8 years ago, leaving my grandmother alone in her apartment. My parents, back then behind my back, saw one empty room and asked my grandmother if we could turn it into my private room because I needed privacy. My grandmother was thrilled with the idea. After discussing it with me, we made the room for me. Since I followed my grandmother's rules and helped her, I didn't spend all my time at her place. Instead, I switched between apartments as needed. For example, I'd come home from school, leave my things, and go to my grandmother's to sleep, then return home in the morning to have breakfast. I had a sort of routine for when I went where, with an accuracy of plus or minus an hour. Directly in front of my entrance is another entrance, and above it, on the window, 70% of the time when I went out, there was an elderly woman. She always looked at me somewhat grumpily as I passed by. Sometimes I glanced at her, but I had headphones on and often wore a hoodie, so I ignored her. When I had the second shift, I usually got home around 8:20, and then I went to my grandmother's around 10:30, of course, with exceptions. That woman was almost always there, but it didn't bother me because why would it? I saw her for 20 seconds a day. Once when I was leaving my house to go to my grandmother's without headphones or a hoodie, she finally said something. Karen, you're going to get high again. Me? Huh. Karen, every day, you go out with a hoodie over your head in the dead of night. It was 10:30 then. I can clearly see what you're doing. Me? What am I doing? Karen, dealing drugs. What's in that backpack? Me, that's none of your business. just a laptop and equipment. Karen, I think it's drugs. Open it and let me see. Me, I felt like telling her that the only thing I would open for her is a punch in the face. Leave me alone, and I just walked away. The next day, she was waiting for me outside the entrance. Karen, what's in that bag? Me, you're a psycho. Karen, if you don't tell me, I'll call the police. Me, call whoever you want. I'm out of here. I left while she was yelling at me. The next day, 2 police officers were waiting for me outside the door with Karen. Karen, that's him. He's the local dealer. Me, what's going on? We'll refer to the police officers as P1 and P2. P1, we received a report that drug trafficking is happening here. Me, looking at him, is this for real? P2, as absurd as it may seem, we have to check it out. Me, can you search me and let me go then? P1, we'll search you, but we won't let you go immediately because the lady said she saw you dealing. Me, that woman is crazy, but do what you have to do. I just want to get this over with. P1 searched me while Karen was yelling about me being a dealer. P2, how old are you? Me, 16. P2, do you have an ID? Me, I literally went to the building next door. I don't even have a wallet. Can I go to my apartment to get it? I'll leave my backpack with the laptop as collateral that I'll return. P1, you live here? Me, yes. P1, I'll accompany you to the apartment but won't enter. Me, okay. When I returned to the apartment, my parents asked what I had forgotten. I said, can I get my wallet? My ID is inside. I want to buy a juice. By the way, I really wanted to buy juice for later. I returned to the police officer, and my parents hadn't noticed anything yet. Not yet. We returned outside, and I showed my ID, which was valid. P2, there's nothing in the backpack. The kid didn't cause any trouble, and let's be real, just look at him. Karen, I know he has drugs. I saw him. Me, where? At this point, Karen made a mistake, pointing to the place under the cameras. Me, when? Karen, she said the exact date. Me, great, we can check the cameras. Realizing her plan backfired, Karen did the only sensible thing. She slapped me. P1 handcuffed her and put her in the car while Karen was screaming. A small detail about me, I have a lot of pimples. I know one person who has approximately as many pimples as I do, and that's it. When you slapped me, it bled because I barely felt the slap, which made it look worse than it actually was. P1 went and informed my parents. They came out, and my mom wiped away the blood while my dad talked to the police. He asked the officer if he could send me to wash up, and P1 sent me. Karen was convicted of assaulting a minor and misusing the police. Since we managed to hush up the whole story from the neighbors by some miracle, no one saw anything. Karen received a punishment and a stern warning. I was late for playing with my friends, which cost me a good heist in GTA, sad face. As a fellow Eastern European, I can see those buildings and the nosy, sour old woman very clearly in my mind. Communist-era old Karens, male and female, are the worst. Mean, obnoxious, in your face, always complaining about young people these days, contributing nothing to the betterment of their community and spending all their time spying on others and stirring shit. I'm glad to read a story where one of them gets to the FO part of their FAFO. Did she go back to living in the same place once she was released? Man, she would have gotten so much junk subscriptions delivered to her for the rest of her miserable days. Why would you need to hush up the story? Some people will gossip and still accuse the OP, even when the result was charges against Karen. I think it depends how connected Karen is in that community. Imagine if she went on a frenzy spreading rumors about OP and his family in that whole community. OP and his family would get the side eye wherever they went. I'm from India and I know the buildings you're talking about. Our buildings were only 3 stories tall, so if we had to go to the next building, we went to the roof and went down the next steps sometimes. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next video.